Right. Yeah. And in kind of this group versus individual paradigm, I think you and I probably both strongly fall on the side of we need to, as I wrote, like in what I wrote, like I came very hard on the side of we need to view the world as individuals. As soon as we deviate from, like, the individual has to be paramount. The minute that we deviate from that, the minute that we put group identity over individual identity, that to me is where that is like red flag, in the same way that calling a group inferior is a red flag. To me, anytime that you see things that way, it's fundamentally, it is racist, or it is sexist, or whichever way you break things down. So I think, and then, yeah, like getting into those ideas in history in the last 100 years, there is such direct correlation, just like what I wrote, like there's such direct correlation to those who viewed things as individuals and their success versus those who viewed things as groups and their failure. But today, people don't even really know the history of that. People don't even, how many people would know what happened in the Soviet Union? How many Westerners would recognize the name Mao Zedong? Like maybe 10%, maybe less.
Young that's people, so scary.
Like,
that's a scary low percentage.
Yeah, he's still highly regarded in China. Well, estimates vary so much. Solzhenitsyn estimated that he was the cause of 100 million deaths. So nearly as many as all the people who died throughout all of World War II. Many times more than how many people Hitler actually killed in genocide. But everybody knows the story of Hitler, and they should. Who knows the story of Mao? Who knows the story of Stalin? Who knows the story of Pol Pot? Like I didn't grow up. I'm pretty sure the first I heard of Pol Pot was like you telling me when you were overseas, sending me messages about it.
Yeah, probably, because that's the first when I learned about him. I think in some of our research before going to Cambodia, but then being there and, seeing horrific leftovers of what happened there and hearing stories from the locals and some American expats who now live there. It's just mind-boggling things. And I mean, if you bring up Pol Pot, he's like, just take him alone, and that's an absolutely horrific piece of history, but he pales in comparison to Mao Zedong. He pales in comparison to Stalin. And so, I mean, I know we talked about doing a deep dive on the darkness of the 1900s. And as we're talking about this, I'm just realizing how key it is that we do that. I think even just for our own sake of taking another look and seeing it all together. I mean, we don't talk about this so much as though we just came through this horrible period in history, but we did. There was so much darkness, so much suffering, so much death, and it's so recent. I mean, I told you this the other day, but it was striking me so freshly as I was driving home from jiu-jitsu the other day in the car, and I was just thinking, man, all four, I think my grandma might be a little bit younger. I think that all four of my grandparents were alive during World War II. I think all four of my grandparents were alive here in America as Hitler's genocide, the Holocaust, was going on.
Yeah, it just happened.
It just happened. And it's, anyway, I just am kind of...
Yeah, it just happened, and there's lessons that are necessary, not optional. There's not like good lessons that you should learn. There's lessons in the last 100 years that are necessary for every citizen of the world today. And I think that it's kind of the same with reading. It's like there's some books that are, they're good reading and they have great lessons in them. And then there are books that are necessary reading. Yeah. And there are books that you cannot function in society without understanding this base level of things that barely anybody understands today. And if we did understand, if we all had the Gulag Archipelago in common, if every person in the West had that story in common, if we all understood what happened in the gulags, if we all understood Alexander Solzhenitsyn's life of traveling through, first fighting the war, and then when he came back, he should have been honored with like a hero's welcome after risking his life and being in a prison of war. He gets back to Russia, and they put him straight into a camp because he's been in a prison of war. He's probably been westernized, and from there he's put into gulags, and he just witnesses death after death after death, and he sees the destruction of everything based on group identity, based on, and that's the second part of my little essay, whatever thing, is based on the equivalence between group disparity and moral failure. That's where things went so evil and so dark, was saying, okay, if you're in power, it must mean that you're evil. If you are a rich, so-called rich farmer, which meant that you probably had like 2 horses or something, like you were still basically in complete poverty. But if you were considered to be one of the rich farmers, then it was like, okay, you're the evil oppressor. You're the bad group because of the way that you've suppressed us. And so off to the gulags with them. Right. And what did that lead to? More death, more destruction. But it's like, if our society had one man's journey through the gulags in our collective memory, things would be in such better shape than they would be. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why this conversation today is so crucial, is that, as we're talking about this darkness of the last century, so much of it came because of drawing distinctions between groups. And whether you wanted to, maybe I haven't mentioned anything that happened on the continent of Africa yet. There's a whole nother set of crazy things that went on there. But so much of the human suffering in the last century has come from drawing these distinctions between groups and elevating them above each other, and making policies differently for different ones of them. And so it's like there's this historical just like siren going off. This, it's just waiting for this lesson to be learned for us as a human race. It's just saying like, hey, stop doing this. Like, don't just no more of this. Like, that's enough. Like, we've had enough of distinguishing between people's, primarily grouping people into categories because of their nationality, ethnicity, gender, because of their identity, and treating them differently or believing differently about them. No, every single individual is valuable, no matter what you look like, no matter what gender you're born with, no matter anything about you. You are intrinsically and eternally valuable as an individual human being. And we need to start shaping we need to keep on.
We need to remember.
We need to remember where we've come in Western society, and why we in America, Canada, these places, why we didn't have these things happen in the last century. And, I can already hear I feel like I have all these Facebook comments ringing in my ears of people, talking about the things that are wrong right now. And in everything I just said, I'm not saying that America's perfect. I'm not saying that Western civilization as a whole is perfect, but I do think that the ideologies, the philosophies are the best. And so as true as we can be to those, and moving even further towards those truths than we've ever been so far, is the right way to go. It's not to say, hey, things feel still not perfect in Western societies, and so let's have another shot at the things that wrought total destruction on humanity in the last century.